The 20th floor of Harmon Tower was nearly empty. Jack Rowan pushed his cleaning cart through the silent corridor, head down, invisible, the way a janitor learns to be. Then he stopped. From behind a half-open door at the end of the hall, broken piano notes drifted out. Slow, searching, like someone trying to say something they had no words for. He pushed the door open. A little girl sat alone at a grand piano, eyes closed, not from tiredness, but because she had never seen anything at all. Her small fingers moved across the keys, reaching for a note she couldn't find. Jack recognized the piece. Claire de Lune. But she kept stopping at the same passage, the hardest one, the one that required something more than technique. He set down his mop, sat beside her, and played the part she was missing. Behind the door, in the dark hallway, a woman in a black suit stood completely still. Her hand gripped the doorframe. Her eyes were red. She didn't walk in. She didn't walk away. The alarm was set for 6:15, but Jack Rowan was already awake. He lay still for a moment in the gray morning dark of his apartment in Pilsen, listening to the city outside. A garbage truck somewhere on the next block, pigeons on the fire escape, the distant moan of a train on the blue line, the sounds of a neighborhood that worked for a living, his neighborhood. He had chosen it because the rent was manageable, and the commute to Harmon Tower was 40 minutes by train. He had stayed because it asked nothing of him. He got up without turning on the bedroom light. By now, his body knew the routine without being told. Coffee first, then breakfast. 2 eggs, toast, orange juice in the blue plastic cup Sophie had used since she was 4 and refused to let him throw away. He moved through the small kitchen in the quiet dark, muscle memory doing all the work, his mind somewhere else entirely. 4 years. That was how long he had been doing this. The getting up, the making breakfast, the packing lunches, the riding trains and mopping floors, and coming home to an apartment that still sometimes felt like it was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. 4 years since Sarah. She had died in March on a Tuesday at 6:47 in the morning in a hospital room on the north side of Chicago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 37. Jack was 38. Sophie was 10. The medical bills came to $180,000. Before Sarah got sick, Jack had spent 14 years as a sergeant first class in the United States Army Band in Washington, D.C. He had played piano at 3 presidential inaugurations. He had once been offered a scholarship to Berklee College of Music, which he had turned down at 18 because he wanted to serve first and study later. Later never came the way he planned. After the funeral, he sold the upright piano in their living room, not because he needed the money, because he couldn't look at it anymore. Every key carried the memory of Sarah standing beside it, humming along while he practiced. Her voice was not remarkable by any trained standard. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. There was one thing he hadn't sold. In the bottom of his work bag, beneath a worn paperback and a spare pair of work gloves, he carried a folded sheet of staff paper, a song he had started writing for Sarah 6 months before she was diagnosed. He'd never finished it. He didn't know how. He wasn't sure he wanted to find out. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:40, still in her pajamas, hair loose around her shoulders. She was 14 now, and the older she got, the more she looked like her mother. Same set to the jaw, same way of watching people carefully before deciding what to say. Jack set her orange juice on the table without being asked. She sat down and looked at him the way she'd been looking at him for 4 years, like she was doing the math on something she couldn't quite solve. "You working tonight?" she asked. "Same as always," he said. 2 miles north and 22 floors up, Harmon Tower stood at the edge of the loop, with its glass face catching the early light off Lake Michigan. It was one of the more recognizable buildings on the Chicago skyline. Sleek, expensive, the kind of building that announced its own importance without saying a word. Diana Harmon had built it that way on purpose. She was 44, the founder and CEO of Harmon and Associates, a real estate development firm valued at $2.4 billion. She had been divorced for 5 years. She raised her daughter alone, or believed she did. Though if you asked the people who actually spent hours with Lily Harmon each week, they might have described the arrangement differently. Mrs. Patterson, Lily's nanny, and Diana's personal assistant, was the one who walked Lily to school, picked her up, supervised her homework, made sure she ate dinner. Diana provided everything else: the apartment on Lakeshore Drive, the private school, the music lessons that Lily had shown enough talent in to justify a very good teacher, and the grand piano on the 20th floor of Harmon Tower, installed specifically so Lily could practice while Diana worked late. Lily was 9 years old and had been blind since birth, a congenital optic nerve condition that left her with no functional vision from her first day in the world. She was quiet in the way that children become quiet when they learn early that adults are busy. She had an extraordinary ear for music, the kind that her formal piano teacher had noted with genuine surprise. She could hear a piece once and recall its structure almost completely. But she had few friends. Her mother's work moved them often, and making friends was a skill that required time Lily rarely had. On certain evenings, when Diana's meetings ran past 10 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson would bring Lily down from the 22nd floor to the music room on 20 and let her practice until Diana was free. It was easier than taking Lily home and coming back, and Lily never complained. The piano room was one of the few places she didn't feel the need to explain herself. The night everything changed, Mrs. Patterson had gone home early with a fever, and Diana was in a 2-hour call that could not be moved. She told Mrs. Patterson she would go down and check on Lily herself as soon as the call ended. She did not make it down before Jack Rowan heard the music. It was 11:47 in the evening when Jack turned his cart onto the 20th floor corridor. He heard it before he reached the music room. Faint at first, then unmistakable. Piano? A melody he recognized immediately. Clair de Lune by Debussy. He had played it at a recital when he was 19, and again at a private event in Georgetown, and one more time, late at night, alone in the apartment. For Sarah, who had asked him to. The playing was halting. Whoever was behind that door kept stopping at the same measure, the third passage, where the left hand had to carry the emotional weight of the piece, while the right moved lightly above it. It was the part most students skipped over or softened. It was also the part that, played correctly, could make a room go quiet. Stop. Try again. Stop. Jack stood in the corridor and listened. He told himself he was just identifying the source of the sound before continuing his route. That was all. He pushed the door open. The girl sat at the grand piano with her eyes closed. She was small, 9, maybe 10, and she wore a school sweatshirt with the name of a private academy on the chest. Her fingers rested on the keys the way a person rests their hand on a surface they are trying to understand through touch alone. She startled at the sound of the door. "Sorry," Jack said quickly. "I'm maintenance. I didn't know anyone was in here." He began to step back out. "Do you know how this part goes?" the girl asked. She didn't turn toward him. Her voice was even, unhurried. Not the voice of a child asking for help, but of someone gathering information. Jack looked at her hands. She had stopped at exactly the right place. The measure where the music had to stop being about notes and start being about something else. He crossed the room. He sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a careful distance between them. He set his hands on the keys, and he played the passage, not as a demonstration, not as a lesson, but the way he used to play it for Sarah, like something that had been true for a long time and had never had the right moment to be said. When he finished, the girl sat still. "You play like you're crying," she said. Jack said nothing, but he didn't stand up. He knew the rule. Derek Sloan, the building manager, had made it plain on Jack's first week. Maintenance staff did not engage with guests, did not touch the equipment on leased floors, and absolutely did not spend time with the CEO's family. It wasn't personal, Sloan had said. It was policy. Jack had nodded and said he understood. Now he sat beside a blind 9-year-old girl at 11:50 at night, on a floor he was supposed to have finished an hour ago, and the rule was perfectly clear in his head. Also perfectly clear, the way her fingers had searched across the keys like she was looking for a door she couldn't find, the way she had sat alone without complaint, the way she'd asked her question, not "Can you help me?" but "Do you know?" as if she were willing to accept that he might not, and was simply trying to find out. He recognized that. The wanting to understand something so badly that you kept trying even when it wasn't working. He stayed. Just that night, he told himself. Just 30 more minutes. He asked her what the passage felt like when she played it. She thought for a moment and said, it felt like something that almost happened. That's exactly right, Jack said. He showed her again. Slowly this time. She listened with her whole body. Outside in the corridor, the cleaning cart sat where he'd left it, its wheels turned slightly inward, as though it too had stopped to hear something it hadn't expected. It was never arranged out loud. No agreement was made. No schedule written down. But every Tuesday and Thursday evening, on the nights when Mrs. Patterson left early and the 20th floor went quiet, Jack Rowan pushed his cleaning cart past the music room at exactly 10:15, and Lily Harmon was already there. 4 weeks passed this way. Each session lasted no more than 45 minutes. Jack kept his cart visible in the corridor outside, positioned so that anyone walking by would see only a janitor on his break, resting near a doorway. Inside, he sat beside Lily at the grand piano and taught her the only way he actually knew how to teach anything, through the stories behind the notes. This measure here, he said one evening, pointing to a passage in Gymnopédie No. 1 that Lily had been struggling with. It's not about keeping tempo. It's about the moment right before someone says goodbye. You know that feeling, when you already know what's coming but you're not ready? Lily considered this with the focused quiet that Jack had come to recognize as her thinking face. Chin slightly lifted, fingers still on the keys. Like when Mrs. Patterson says she's leaving at 9 but she puts her coat on at 8:50, she said. Exactly like that, Jack said. She played the measure again. This time it landed. Lily's progress was not the result of improved technique, though her technique was improving. It was something harder to explain. Because she could not see, she had never learned to read music visually, to follow a printed score the way sighted students did. She heard everything. She stored it whole. When Jack described a phrase as carrying grief, she played grief. When he said a chord felt like light coming through a window you hadn't opened in a long time, she found that too. He stopped correcting her fingering after the second week. Her fingering corrected itself once she understood what the music was trying to say. The night of the 5th session, Jack got home to the apartment in Pilsen at midnight and did something he had not done in 4 years. He sat down at the old keyboard in the corner of the living room, a mid-range Casio he'd bought for Sophie 3 years ago when she briefly wanted to learn piano, before she decided she preferred drawing. It had been unplugged so long that he had to search behind the bookshelf for the adapter. He found it. He plugged it in. He sat down on the stool and played. Nothing specific, just whatever his hands remembered. A fragment of a sonata. The opening of a piece he'd performed at Fort Myer in 2008. A progression he'd written once on the bus between cities. He didn't notice Sophie standing in the hallway until he looked up. She was leaning against the doorframe in her oversized sleep shirt, arms folded, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. She didn't say anything. After a moment, she went back to her room, but he heard her door close softly, the way she only closed it when she didn't want him to know she was crying. Then came the evening that changed the shape of everything. Lily had asked him to help her learn a piece she'd been working on by ear, something she'd heard in a recording she kept on her phone. She held the phone out toward him and pressed play. The recording was rough, clearly made in a quiet room, on a phone with unsteady hands. A piano, simple melodic line, unhurried. The kind of music someone wrote for themselves, not for an audience. It moved through 2 complete phrases and then stopped, not at a natural resting point, but mid-sentence, the way a letter ends when the writer decided not to finish it. Jack listened. He asked her to play it again. The second time, something shifted in the back of his mind. Not a memory, more like a recognition. The harmonic progression in the second phrase moved in a way that felt close to something he knew from the inside. The way the left hand descended in the final 4 bars before the piece cut off. He had written something that moved almost identically, in a different key, on a sheet of staff paper that lived at the bottom of his work bag. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Lily's fingers traced the edge of the piano's fallboard, the way she often did when she was choosing her words carefully. "It's my mom's," she said. "She wrote it when I was little. I found it on her computer a long time ago. She never finished it." Jack set Lily's phone down on the music stand. His hand, resting on his knee, had gone very still. On the 9th evening of the secret lessons, Diana Harmon came downstairs. Mrs. Patterson had sent a message from the 22nd floor asking whether Lily should be brought up, since it was nearly 11 o'clock. Diana had looked at her phone, looked at the contract on her screen that still needed 2 more rounds of review, and replied that she would go down herself. She took the elevator to 20, walked the corridor toward the music room, and stopped just short of the door. She could hear Lily playing, not the tentative searching she was used to hearing through walls and doorways over the years. The stopping, the small, frustrated silences, the same 4 bars repeated until they blurred together. What she heard now was Gymnopédie No. 1, played with steadiness, and something else that Diana didn't immediately have a word for. Then a man's voice, low and unhurried. "Perfect. Now don't think about the notes. Think about what you want to say." Diana stood with her hand on the door handle. She did not push it open. She was the CEO of the building, the owner of the piano, the child's mother. There was no reason not to walk in. She stayed where she was and listened until the piece ended. When she finally turned and walked back toward the elevator, she carried something on her face that she wouldn't have been able to name if asked. It wasn't anger. It wasn't relief. It was closer to the feeling of discovering that something you thought was broken had been quietly working all along, without you. Derek Sloan was 51 years old and had managed Harmon Tower for 15 years. He knew the building the way some people know their own bodies. Every system, every schedule, every variance from routine. He noticed things. He noticed the light in the 20th floor music room at 11:08 on a Thursday night when the floor was supposed to be empty. He pulled up the security camera feed, watched for 4 minutes, and recognized Jack Rowan immediately. The next morning, he called Jack into the building management office on the 3rd floor. He didn't invite him to sit down. "You're a janitor, Rowan," Sloan said. "You mop floors. You don't sit in piano rooms with the CEO's daughter. You don't touch the instruments. You don't talk to the guests. Is that clear?" Jack stood with his hands at his sides. "Yes," he said. Sloan looked at him for a moment, the way a man looks when he expected pushback, and is mildly disappointed not to get it. "I don't know what you thought you were doing," Sloan continued, his voice dropping slightly. "But nobody here wants to hear your life story. Nobody cares what you used to be. You're maintenance staff. Act like it." Jack said nothing. His eyes stayed level. He left the office, collected his cart from the service corridor, and began his morning route. When he reached the 20th floor and passed the music room, he slowed without fully stopping. Through the glass panel in the door, the grand piano sat undisturbed in the gray morning light. Polished, still, as if nothing had ever happened there. He pushed his cart forward and kept going. The following Tuesday, Jack did not go to the 20th floor at 10:15. He finished his assigned floors, clocked his break in the basement, and took the long route back to the service elevator. He kept his cart moving. He did not slow near the music room corridor. He told himself this was the correct decision, the only decision that made sense given the warning he'd received, the job he needed, the insurance that paid for Sophie's quarterly audiology appointments. At home afterward, Sophie was still at the kitchen table with her homework when he came in. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since she was 12, like she could tell the difference between tired and something else. "You okay?" she asked. "Just tired," Jack said. He opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it without taking anything out. Sophie watched him for a moment, then looked back at her notebook. She didn't push. On the 20th floor, at 10:15, Lily sat at the piano bench and waited. She played a fragment, the opening of Claire de Lune, then stopped. She played it again. Then she put her hands in her lap and sat facing the instrument in silence. Mrs. Patterson, who had returned to work that week after her illness, came to the doorway at 10:40 and told Lily it was time to go up. Lily stood. She didn't argue. But before she followed Mrs. Patterson out, she reached back and rested one hand lightly on the edge of the piano keys without pressing them. Mrs. Patterson noticed that Lily did not speak on the elevator ride up. The next morning, Diana asked Mrs. Patterson about the change in Lily's mood. She had noticed at breakfast, Lily eating in the particular quiet that meant something was wrong, not the contented quiet she had when she was thinking through a piece of music. Diana asked whether anything had happened at school. Mrs. Patterson said no. Diana asked if Lily had mentioned anything that was bothering her. Mrs. Patterson set down the coffee she was holding and said carefully, "Ms. Harmon, there's something I should have told you sooner." She explained what she knew. Not everything, just what she had seen and heard over the past several weeks. A janitor on the night shift, Jack Rowan, had been spending time in the music room with Lily. Teaching her, it seemed, or something close to teaching. Diana's first response was immediate and familiar. "Who authorized that?" she asked. Her voice was even, but her jaw had tightened. "He's maintenance staff. He has no business being alone with her. I want everything documented." Mrs. Patterson nodded. She had taken a breath to say something further when she stopped herself, then said it anyway. "Ms. Harmon, Lily hasn't smiled like that in 5 years. Not since before the divorce." Diana did not respond. She sat with that for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, after her last call ended, she went down to the 20th floor. She walked the corridor to the music room and stood outside the door the way she had on that first night. But this time, she had come on purpose. The room was empty. The piano sat in the dark, untouched. Diana stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the instrument, at the small bench where Lily always sat, at the space beside it, where someone else had apparently been sitting for weeks without her knowing. She turned and walked back to the elevator. Somewhere between the 20th floor and the 22nd, she understood something she had not wanted to look at directly. She had not noticed because she had not been looking. Not because she was busy, because she had stopped expecting to see anything when she looked at her daughter's life. The following Tuesday, Jack was working the 18th floor when his phone rang. The number was one he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. Then he did. "Mr. Jack." Lily's voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, the way it always was when she had arrived at a conclusion she considered obvious. "I got the ending. I want you to hear it." Jack stood in the corridor with the phone against his ear. "How did you get this number?" "The employee board at the front desk," she said simply. "Are you coming?" He stood still for a long moment, looking at the far end of the corridor. Then he pocketed his phone, left his cart where it was, and took the elevator up to 20. Lily was already at the piano when he came in. She didn't turn at the sound of the door. She had learned his footsteps by then. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She played Claire de Lune from the beginning. All of it. Every phrase, every transition, every passage they had worked through over the past several weeks, including the third measure, the one where the left hand had to carry the weight of everything the right hand couldn't say. She did not stop. She did not slow down at the hard parts. She played it the way the piece was meant to be played, like someone who had stopped being afraid of what they might feel if they let it in. When the last note faded, Jack sat without speaking for a moment. "What did you hear?" Lily asked. "I heard someone who's not afraid to feel anymore," he said. Lily smiled, fully, openly, without the careful restraint she usually kept in place. It was the first time Jack had seen her smile that way, and it was so sudden and unguarded that it took him a second to recognize what he was looking at. Then the door opened. Derek Sloan stood in the frame. Behind him, 2 security guards waited in the corridor. Sloan looked at Jack with the flat expression of someone who had been waiting for this. "Jack Rowan," he said. "You were warned. Clear your locker. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." Lily went rigid on the bench. "What's happening?" Her voice had lost its composure. "Mr. Jack, what's happening?" Jack stood slowly. He kept his voice even. "It's okay, Lily. You did great tonight. Don't stop playing." Sloan gestured to the guards. "Escort him out." Jack walked to the door. Just before he crossed the threshold, he looked back. Lily had turned on the bench toward the sound of his footsteps. Her right arm was extended slightly toward him, hand open, reaching for something that was already leaving. The piano keys behind her were still vibrating with the last notes of the piece, the sound fading into the room like something being slowly taken away. Then the door closed. It was 2:30 in the morning when Jack got back to the apartment in Pilsen. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table. She had not gone to bed. She looked at her father in the doorway, at the cardboard box of personal items under his arm, the paperback, the spare gloves, his locker key still in his hand, and understood without being told. Neither of them spoke for a while. Sophie was the one who finally broke the quiet. "Was it worth it, Dad?" Jack set the box on the table. "Yeah," he said. "It was." Sophie looked at him for another moment, then got up and went to her room. Jack sat down at the kitchen table alone. He pulled the box toward him and began setting things out. The paperback, the gloves, a photograph of Sophie from her first day of middle school that he'd kept taped to the inside of his locker door. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, was a folded sheet of staff paper. He'd transferred it from his work bag into his locker on a rainy morning months ago, meaning to take it home and never remembering to. Now it had come home with him after all, tucked under everything else, patient as ever. He unfolded it slowly. The notes were in his own handwriting, pencil gone slightly gray with age, the paper soft at the creases from years of being folded and unfolded and folded again. A melody in F minor. 2 phrases complete, a third left unresolved. He had written it in the fall before Sarah's diagnosis, when he was still under the impression they had all the time in the world. He looked at the place where the note stopped. Then he thought about the recording Lily had played him, the way it moved in the second phrase, the way the left hand descended in those last 4 bars before it simply ended without resolution. He set the sheet of staff paper on the table and looked at it for a long time. The 2 pieces were not the same, but they moved toward the same silence from different directions, like 2 people on opposite sides of a room, both reaching toward a door neither of them could open alone. Diana Harmon found out Jack had been fired through the sound of her daughter crying. She heard it from the hallway outside Lily's room at 7 in the morning, not loud, but the particular kind of crying that a child does when they are trying not to be heard, which is somehow always worse than the other kind. Mrs. Patterson was already in the kitchen when Diana came out. She told Diana what had happened the night before. Diana listened without speaking. Lily did not come out for breakfast. When Diana looked in, Lily was sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed, hands in her lap, facing the wall the way she sometimes did when the world had become too much to organize. She said she wasn't hungry. She said she was fine. Diana knew she was neither. In her office on the 22nd floor, Diana called Derek Sloan up at 8:30. Sloan arrived with the confident bearing of a man who expected to be thanked. He explained the situation cleanly. Jack Rowan had violated building policy, had been warned once, and had continued the behavior. The termination was procedurally correct and fully documented. He set a folder on Diana's desk as evidence. Diana did not open the folder. "Did you look at who he was before he was a janitor?" she asked. Sloan's expression shifted slightly. "The policy applies regardless of—" "Pull his full file," Diana said. "Background, service record, employment history. On my desk in an hour." Sloan left. The file arrived in 50 minutes. Diana read it at her desk with her office door closed. Sergeant First Class, United States Army Band, Washington, D.C. 14 years of service, multiple commendations. Nominated for the National Piano Competition in 2009. Wife, Sarah Rowan, deceased. March 2020, pancreatic cancer. Outstanding medical debt, $180,000. Hired as night shift maintenance staff at Harmon Tower in 2021. The reason listed for accepting the position: employer-provided health insurance with dependent coverage. Diana read the next line slowly. Dependent. Sophie Rowan, age 14. Currently under treatment for a progressive auditory nerve condition with potential for partial to full hearing loss. She read it again. A man who had spent 14 years playing piano at the highest levels his country could ask of him had taken a job mopping floors in her building. Not because it was the only work he could find, but because it was the only work that came with insurance good enough to protect his daughter's hearing. And while he was here, in her building, on her floors, he had quietly sat down beside a blind girl who was learning music alone in the dark, and given her something that all of Diana's resources had not thought to provide. Diana set the file down on her desk and looked out at the lake for a long time. Diana went to Lily's room that afternoon and sat down beside her on the bed, not in the visiting way she sometimes did, perched at the edge with one eye on her phone, but fully, with her back against the headboard and her legs stretched out the way Lily always sat. Lily didn't move away. She also didn't speak first. Diana asked about Jack, not in the careful, investigative way she had asked Mrs. Patterson, but simply, what was it like? What did he teach her? What did she talk to him about? Lily answered slowly at first, then with increasing steadiness. She described the way he explained music through situations she already understood. She described the way he listened when she played, not evaluating, not waiting for her to finish so he could correct her, but actually listening, the way you listen to something you don't want to end. She said he never once treated her blindness as a problem to be worked around. When Lily finished, she sat quietly for a moment, and then she asked, "Mom, do you know why Mr. Jack cried the first time I played your song?" Diana turned her head. "My song?" Lily reached for her phone on the nightstand. She found the audio file without looking. She had opened it enough times to know exactly where it lived, and pressed play. The recording came through the small phone speaker, slightly thin with distance. A piano. A simple melody, unhurried, moving through two phrases before stopping mid-thought, the way a sentence ends when the speaker has run out of certainty. Diana went very still. She had recorded that piece on her phone in the early hours of the morning, alone in the piano room of their old apartment on the north side, 3 days after Lily's diagnosis was confirmed. Lily had been 3 years old. Diana had sat down at the piano that night, not to compose, not to practice, but because she didn't know what else to do with what she was feeling. The melody came out of her without being planned. She had recorded it so she wouldn't lose it, then never opened the file again. She had no memory of it ever being anywhere Lily could find it. "I found it on your computer," Lily said. "A long time ago. I didn't know what it was. I just liked it." Diana looked at the phone in Lily's hand. "Mr. Jack said it felt like someone writing about grief and love at the same time," Lily said. "He said it felt like his song, too." Diana thought about a man sitting at a kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning in Pilsen, looking at a sheet of unfinished staff paper. She thought about a melody, written in grief, moving in a direction that resembled, from the inside, something another person had also been unable to finish. She had not completed the piece because she hadn't known what the next part should be. She had written as far as she understood, and then she had stopped because she had not yet understood what came after the grief. She was not sure she had figured that out yet. But she was beginning to think someone else might have gotten closer than she had. The meeting was called for 2 o'clock in the 22nd floor conference room. Diana had asked Sloan, the head of human resources, and 2 senior operations managers to attend. She gave no agenda in advance. Sloan came in with the same composure he'd carried into her office that morning. He took his seat at the table and set his hands in front of him in the manner of a man who has done nothing wrong. Diana was standing at the window when they arrived. She did not sit. She was holding a single sheet of paper, which she had been reading before they came in. "Do you know what this is, Derek?" she asked, without turning. "No, Ms. Harmon." She turned and set it on the table in front of him. Jack Rowan's military service record, 14 years, multiple commendations, piano soloist at 3 presidential inaugurations. Sloan glanced at it. "Ms. Harmon, the conduct policy clearly—" "You fired a man," Diana said, her voice level and precise, "who performed at 3 presidential inaugurations, because he sat down beside my daughter and showed her how to play a piece of music. The policy exists to protect." "The policy exists to protect my daughter," Diana said, "not to protect your judgment about who is and isn't allowed to have worth in this building." She set a second file on the table, a compiled review of 6 months of security camera footage, prepared by the building's security director that morning. Jack Rowan did not violate a single security protocol. Every session took place during his scheduled shift hours. Lily was never in any situation that could be described as unsafe. "There is nothing in this footage that supports the decision you made." She looked at Sloan directly. "What I see in these recordings is a man who did his job, and then chose to do more than his job, because he saw a child who needed someone to show up." She held his gaze. "And what I see in your decision is a man who punished someone for being more than you decided he was allowed to be." Sloan began to say something about precedent. Diana spoke over him, still without raising her voice. "You didn't fire him because he broke a rule, Derek. You fired him because you made up your mind about him before he ever gave you a reason to. And once you did that, nothing he did was ever going to change it." She straightened the files on the table. "You're suspended pending a full HR review, effective today. Please leave your access card with the desk on your way out." The room was quiet. Sloan stood. He did not look at the other people at the table. He walked to the door and he left. She drove herself to Pilsen that afternoon. No company car, no assistant, no prior notice. She parked on the street outside the address she'd found in Jack's employment file and sat in the car for a moment before getting out. Not from hesitation, but the way you sometimes need a moment before you do something that can't be undone. Jack answered the door in a gray shirt and work pants, as if he'd been doing something around the apartment. He looked at her without surprise. She had the sense that he'd been expecting some version of this, though perhaps not so soon. "Mr. Rowan," Diana said, "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Ms. Harmon." "My daughter does," Diana said. "And I do." He stepped back from the door. She came in and stood in the small kitchen, taking in the apartment, the keyboard in the corner of the living room, the photograph on the refrigerator, the paperback on the kitchen table next to a folded sheet of staff paper. The apartment of a man who had reduced his life to what was necessary and hadn't yet started adding things back. She told him about the recording, where it came from, when she'd made it, why she had never finished it. She was precise about the facts and did not make the telling more than it was. It was the night of Lily's diagnosis. She sat down at the piano and played something that came out of her without planning. She recorded it because she was afraid she'd lose it. She never went back to it because she hadn't known what the next part should be. Jack listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I have a song like that too." He went to the kitchen table and brought back the folded sheet of staff paper. He unfolded it carefully, with the particular care of someone handling something that has been folded and unfolded many times, and set it on the table between them. They both looked at it. Two unfinished pieces, written by two different people in two different rooms, out of two different losses, moving toward the same unwritten place. "Maybe they were always meant to be finished together," Diana said quietly. Jack looked at the sheet of paper for a long moment. Diana told him what she was offering. Not a return to maintenance staff. The Harmon Foundation was expanding its community programs. She had been planning a music initiative for children with disabilities in the Chicago area, and it had not yet found a director. Free instruction, small class sizes, a proper space. The position was his if he wanted it. Jack looked at the wall, then at the hallway that led to Sophie's room. "Give me a day," he said. That evening, after dinner, Jack sat at the kitchen table with Sophie and told her everything. The sessions with Lily, the warning from Sloan, the termination, Diana's visit that afternoon. He told her about the unfinished songs. He told her what Diana had offered. Sophie listened in the way she had, completely, without filling the quiet with questions. When he finished, she was still for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, when's the last time you played because you wanted to, not because someone needed you to?" Jack thought about it honestly. He traced it back past the keyboard sessions with Lily, past the evening he'd played the Casio at midnight after the 5th lesson. "That night," he said, 3 weeks ago, after the first time I played with Lily." Sophie nodded once. "Then you already know the answer." Jack looked at his daughter, 14 years old, carrying something difficult in her body, with the same quiet she'd inherited from her mother, telling him the truth as plainly as she always had. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. 7 months later, the Harmon Foundation Music Hall was not a large venue, a converted rehearsal space on the near north side, remodeled over the summer with a small raised stage, rows of folding chairs, and acoustics that had been professionally corrected. On the night of the first performance, every seat was filled. Parents, siblings, a few local journalists, and a photographer from a community arts publication. The children in the program ranged in age from 7 to 15. Several used wheelchairs. 3 were nonverbal. All of them had spent the past several months learning, in a small room with a patient teacher, that music was not something you had to explain yourself to in order to be understood by it. Jack stood in the wings to the left of the stage. He watched from there. Lily came out third. She had asked not to be guided to her position, and the stage manager had honored that. She walked from the wings to the center of the stage in measured, deliberate steps, each one placed with the careful confidence of someone who has learned a path by walking it many times. She found the piano bench, sat and settled her hands in her lap for a moment, before moving them to the keys. The room went quiet. She did not play Claire de Lune. She did not play Gymnopédie No. 1. She played the piece that had never had an ending, her mother's melody, the one Diana had recorded alone in a dark room when Lily was 3 years old, and the future had felt like a door no one knew how to open. Lily played both phrases the way she had learned them, slowly and without hurry. And then, without stopping, she continued into a third phrase. New notes, written in pencil on a separate sheet of paper that Jack had brought to Harmon Tower one afternoon in early September and left with Mrs. Patterson for Lily to learn. The continuation fit the original the way a sentence fits when the right words are finally found, not forced into place, arrived at. In the front row, Diana Harmon sat with her hands folded in her lap. She had known what piece Lily would play. She had not been prepared for what it would feel like to hear it completed. She kept her eyes on her daughter and let the tears come without trying to stop them, which was not something she had allowed herself to do in front of other people in longer than she could remember. In the wings, Jack held the folded sheet of staff paper he had carried for 4 years. It was not the same as it had been. Across the bottom half of the page, in pencil, were the new notes, the third phrase, the continuation, the part that finally answered the question the first two had been asking. He had written it over 3 weeks in October, late at night, at the kitchen table, after Sophie had gone to bed. Sophie stood beside him now. She had come straight from school, still in her jacket, and she had not said much since arriving. She stood close enough that her shoulder was almost touching his, and when the third phrase began, the new phrase, Lily's hands moving through something that had never existed before this evening. Sophie leaned her head slowly against her father's arm and stayed there. Lily played the final chord and held it until it dissolved completely into the room. For 1 full second, no one moved. Then the applause started, uneven at first, then full, the way it comes when people are still deciding whether to breathe first. Lily sat with her hands in her lap and her chin lifted slightly, reading the sound of the room the way she read everything, through attention, through feeling, through whatever sense she had developed over 9 years to replace the one she had never had. She turned her face toward the left wing of the stage. "Did I get it right?" she asked. Her voice was clear in the way voices carry, in a room that has just gone quiet. Jack straightened. "You got it perfect, kid," he said. Jack Rowan did not become famous. His name did not appear on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. He did not have the kind of story that gets optioned for a film. No single dramatic reversal. No moment where the crowd stood up and the world recognized its mistake. What he had was a small room on the near north side, open every Tuesday and Thursday, where children who had been told in various ways that music was not quite meant for them came and learned otherwise. Lily Harmon performed for the first time at Carnegie Hall at the age of 16. In the program notes, she thanked 2 people by name, her mother and a man named Jack, whom she described as the first person who ever truly heard her. Sophie Rowan completed her treatment the following spring. She kept her hearing. Diana Harmon learned to drive on Wednesday afternoons, specifically so she could take Lily to and from lessons herself. She had a driver. She chose not to use him on Wednesdays. She liked the 20 minutes in the car each way, the time when there was nothing to attend to except the sound of her daughter's voice telling her about her day, and the song that Sarah Rowan had loved, the one that had lived unfinished at the bottom of a work bag for 4 years, folded along the same creases until the paper had gone soft. That song finally had an ending. Not because Jack found it alone in the dark, because a 9-year-old girl played a stranger's melody in an empty room one night, and a man who had been trying to forget what music felt like sat down beside her and remembered. Some things are not meant to be seen. They are meant to be heard, by the right person, at the right time, when both of them are finally ready to listen.